I'm Mike Brown, author, nerd, and host of the Dark Poutine podcast. Join me and Morgan Knudsen, author, paranormal researcher, and host of the TV shows Paranormal 911 and Haunted Hospitals, as we take you on a journey for the curious about the unseen, the mysterious, and the incredible things happening in the world about us. Welcome to Supernatural Circumstances. In the first part of this episode, Morgan takes a dive into the topic of exorcism and how it relates to psychology. Later in the show, we had the pleasure of speaking with Andrea Perron, eldest daughter of 5 to Carolyn and Roger. Their story was made famous by the well-known 2013 horror film, The Conjuring. The Perrons, though, don't feel the movie got it right. To set the record straight, Andrea has written a trilogy of books based on her experiences in the home, titled House of Darkness, House of Light. As well, she and other members of the Perron family have also since been involved in the documentary Bathsheba, Search for Evil, and that airs on the day that this podcast drops, Monday, March 28, 2022, at 8 p.m. Eastern and Pacific on T&E, the Travel and Escape channel in Canada. Andrea Perron has said to press outlets in Canada that Bathsheba, Search for Evil, is the most in-depth interview her family has ever given on camera. Morgan and I have both seen it and recommend it highly. A summer blockbuster, The Conjuring exploded on the movie screens, terrifying audiences worldwide. Some called it the scariest occult-related film since The Exorcist. Directed by James Wan, made famous by the low-budget blockbuster Saw, the movie was based on the true story of the Perron family. The Perrons, looking for help with unexplained and increasingly disturbing events at their Rhode Island farmhouse, turned to famed paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren, played by Patrick Wilson and Vera Farmiga. In the film, forced to confront a powerful demonic entity, the Warrens found themselves caught in what they described as the most terrifying case of their lives. But what was the real story? How close was the film to what actually happened? Did it really happen at all? Was any of it right? As with many Hollywood films, the story that the Conjuring fans saw on screen was much more terrifying to those who truly experienced it. In a letter to horrormovies.ca in June 2013, Andrea Perron wrote, quote, "The Conjuring is based on a true story, our story. However, the film is not based on my trilogy, House of Darkness, House of Light. It is instead based upon the case files of Ed and Lorraine Warren. There are liberties taken and a few discrepancies, but overall, it is what it claims to be, based on a true story, believe it or not." End quote. Andrea Perron claims that after director James Wan read her books, he refused to include some of the facts of the case that he felt were too terrifying for audiences. Andrea told Chris Janselowitz for Global Television that, quote, "The Conjuring is an excellent film for what it is. It's about 95% fiction and about 5% hard truth," end quote. Located in the small country town of Harrisville, Rhode Island, Roger Perron and his wife Carolyn purchased the home in the winter of 1970. The 200-acre property offered plenty of space for them to raise their 5 daughters, Andrea, Nancy, Christine, Cynthia, and April. Originally built in 1693, the Arnold Estate, as it is called, has a long storied history of hauntings and terror even up to the present day. The unexplained events for the Perron family began on the day they moved into the farmhouse in January of 1971. As the disturbing events increased in frequency, the family became concerned and reached out for help. Ed and Lorraine Warren, actually the second group of paranormal investigators to enter the home, identified one spirit who was called Bathsheba, and she became the focus of the Conjuring film. The entity is believed to be the spirit of a nearby neighbor from the 1800s, named Bathsheba Sherman, rumored to have been involved in occult activities. However, Andrea Perron thinks that Bathsheba has gotten a bad rap and that there were numerous entities active in the home taunting the family. She says that one of the most violent encounters occurred during a seance performed in the home by the Warrens. During that, Andrea watched as her mother Carolyn was attacked psychically and physically and flung about the room by unseen hands. The event was so violent that many present at the time, including young Andrea, thought Carolyn might perish. The film portrays Ed and Lorraine as heroes who saved the family from their ordeal, but that was not the case. After the Perron family cut ties with Ed and Lorraine in 1974, they continued living in the home, and the events continued intermittently for the next 6 years, none of which involved the Warrens. The Perrons moved out in June of 1980. We'll get into more of what happened in the Perrons' home with Andrea when we speak to her later, but first, here's Morgan with her take on exorcism.
Exorcism, or its root word, exorkizin, in Greek meaning to bind by oath, has become nearly myth and legend in both Western tales, the churches, and then idolized by Hollywood history. This powerful process and ritual has been almost entirely attributed to Catholicism, although its roots stem far into places that go back centuries. Hollywood has done a great job in making a very controversial and often secretive subject relevant once again, but with a mix of both truth and, of course, Hollywood endings. The United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, for example, noted that the Wright director and his adaptation of the story of Father Gary Thomas was representative of their faith, but felt that the horror aspect took away from the main character's spiritual journey. So, what then is exorcism really about? And what can we take away from what is often seen as a very outdated practice? First, let's take a look at the origins of the idea. Exorcism itself consists of the idea that an invading intelligence is causing distress, considered a type of possession, and needs to be removed by force. Typically, this entity is causing pain, illness, upset, and making someone's life generally miserable. According to the DSM-5, a case of possession trance disorder can only be given to those who are in distress from such possession, or belief in that condition, not those who believe or are demonstrating that they are receiving positive messages, love, connection with a loved one, or other joyful connection with a non-physical mind. In many cultures, the very idea of possession is considered a positive and a highly spiritual experience, often experienced by shaman or healers, or channels such as Esther Hicks, Louis Benjamin, or Jane Roberts, to name a few. When we reach back into ancient Mesopotamia, for example, all forms of sickness, both physical and psychological, were attributed to the supernatural, and specifically possession. The number of spirits lying in wait to possess or overtake someone's consciousness or body was considered one of the most important factors in the daily life of a Babylonian. In order to rid these people of said illnesses, the exorcist would construct clay or wax statues and proceed to destroy them, believing that this was symbolic of ridding the victim from whatever demon ailed them. Assyrian tablets offer the first written accounts for the treatment of illnesses in medicine, which carries over into further accounts of exorcism. Often they included rituals where demons were challenged or prayer was offered, but they usually related to an outside cause as the origin of the illness. If you had a cold or even something such as epilepsy, it must indeed be possession. Recently, a small carving in the back of one of the Assyrian tablets was discovered. It was that of a demon said to cause Bennu, or epilepsy, in patients. Significant since the diagnosis of epilepsy was often related to hysteria so many years later. Homer, Socrates, and Plato spoke repeatedly of demons, who believed that anyone demonstrating mental illness or insanity was under the influence of monsters. The cult of Dionysus in ancient Greece caused the ritual to become so widespread that it was legally called to a halt in ancient Rome in 186 BC. In addition, priestesses served as channels and mediums. For example, the pronouncements of Apollo at Delphi were given through a priestess, of which were then interpreted by priests at the time, although it was later discovered that gases from the ground on where she often gave her pronouncements may have been the cause of her altered states of consciousness. Folklore is not deprived of demonic stories either. The Oni of Japan are demons said to bring about storms and spoken of in ancient Japanese history. Kelpies are known in Scotland to haunt pools, waiting to drown travelers who are unaware of their presence. But it's not until the 4th century AD that we begin to see evidence of the image of exorcism which Hollywood holds so dear. Zeno of Verona writes, "His face was deprived of color. His body rises up of itself. The eyes in madness roll in their sockets and squint horribly. The teeth, covered with a terrible foam, grind between blue-white lips. And limbs, twisted in all directions, are given over to trembling. He sighs. He weeps. He fears the appointed day of judgment and complains that he is driven out. He confesses the time and place he entered into man." We are all familiar with films such as The Exorcist or The Conjuring. But where is the line drawn between genuine experience and mental instability? Is there a line at all? When we began to look at possession and exorcism in the late 1880s, the formation of the Society of Psychical Research became present to combat and investigate claims of mediumship versus hysteria. We begin to see things like spiritualism making a large contribution to the understanding of known mental health issues which are treatable today, such as borderline personality disorder. Without the ability to examine the mind, even using a template of possible possession, we would not have the treatments of such disorders that we do today. Does this mean all cases of possession are mental illness? Well, that's up for great debate. The Catholic Church approves 1 in 3,000 cases of exorcism a year, and only after rigorous medical testing by trained physicians and psychologists. If we take a look at the exorcist case of Roland Doe, the young Maryland boy who was reportedly possessed by the Babylonian demon Pazuzu in the 1970s, we see the interjection of J.B. Rhine, stemming from the psychology department at Duke University, and later opening a new parapsychology laboratory there. When he retired from Duke in 1965, it moved off campus and became an independent international research center. Since 1995, it's been known as the Rhine Research Center, still located in Durham, North Carolina. Many major universities became heavily interested in the idea of altered states of consciousness and what those implications actually mean for the studying of the human brain and mind. Princeton, Harvard, Edinburgh, as well as the South American universities became heavily interested in understanding the nature of psi and altered states. Today, researchers such as Alexandra Moira Almeida in Brazil are at the front lines of research into the line between paranormal and its relationship to human consciousness. In the early decades, the medical establishment treated psi experiences as pathological, regarding so-called spiritist phenomenon as disorders that threaten public health. Now, things are quite different. The overlap of spiritualism and human mental health has become undeniably interlinked, and if we wish to continue to understand who we are, delving into the realm of psi is becoming a necessity. Since the 1990s, scholarly interest in psi has been growing. Parapsychology began to be established in universities, and religious controversies have greatly calmed down. The rite of Catholic exorcism continues to fascinate and terrify audiences all over the world, despite the advancement of the idea of possession in many other areas of research. Positive messages, such as those from channels like Esther Hicks, tend to go unnoticed as the same type of phenomenon in the eyes of viewers. In these cases, we can start to look at important techniques that are being taught, such as surrender versus overworking, or being able to still our minds, to allow apparent non-physical communication and psi. Many, such as Edgar Cayce or Leonora Piper, were documented at length and delivered positive messages through trance states and automatic writing, among other things. Piper herself described the experience as follows: "I feel as if something were passing over my brain, making it numb. A sensation similar to that when I experienced under ether, only the unpleasant odor of the ether is absent. I feel a little cold too, not very, just a little, as if a cold breeze passed over me, and people and objects become smaller until they finally disappear, and then I know nothing more until I wake up, when the first thing I'm conscious of is a bright, very, very bright light, and then darkness, such darkness. My hands and arms begin to tingle, just as one's foot tingles after it's been asleep, and I see, as if from a great distance, objects and people in the room, but they're very small and very black." Leonora described the entity as an elderly man who passed away in 1860 and who later was replaced by another personality named George, a deceased acquaintance known to the investigator, Richard Hodgson. Controversy, however, was rampant, but, real or not, Piper believed that she was possessed by these personalities with no ill will or ill effects, which is the very crux of the classification of possession trance disorder in the DSM-5. The causes and outcomes of possession vary from violent and tragic to beautiful and enlightening, and I believe there are things to be learned from it, as I mentioned above. If it is indeed a real phenomenon, then we must conclude that there is a consciousness, being a collective or otherwise, that is more than excited to guide us forward. It addresses the age-old question of, are we alone? And if possession is real, the answer is inevitably no. It opens up the hard problem again. Is consciousness emergent or fundamental? If it is not fundamental, we must start to look at the mind in a new way. If people who exhibit possession-like symptoms, such as knowing information they would have no way of obtaining or relaying enlightened knowledge, then we must take a deeper look at how the mind is forming and retaining information. Either way, the phenomenon of possession and exorcism is a fascinating look into human history and the human future. It has graced our theaters, our science and medical textbooks, psychology, and has helped to shape psychoanalysis. It's brought forth fear and comfort to people for centuries. Bringing exorcism into the realm of scientific exploration is both a venture into anthropology and wonder, and will continue to hold its place in the halls of legend for years to come.
Next up is our interview with author and one of the real-life subjects of the true story on which the Conjuring film is loosely based, Andrea Perron. Andrea graduated with a degree in philosophy and English from Chatham College in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She has spent many years engaging in a variety of creative endeavors as a professional singer, songwriter, musician, and actor. For more than 20 years, Andrea was a cast member with the Theatre Company of Rhode Island, performing on the stage of the Assembly Theatre, the historic centerpiece of Harrisville. Despite her many creative accomplishments, for Andrea, writing is her true passion. In 2007, she began writing a manuscript that has evolved into the 3 volumes of House of Darkness, House of Light, spawning some nightmares while exhuming memories of the dead, revisiting a past that mapped the future for Andrea and her family. Here's our interview with Andrea Perron.
I am thrilled and excited. Andrea Perron is here with us on Supernatural Circumstances today, and we are thrilled to have you because you've had not only such incredible experiences throughout your life, but also because of your overall message of positivity. And that's something like both Mike and I have been so driven to present to the world over with parapsychology and things like that. So welcome.
Thank you. I really appreciate you bringing me on your broadcast. And to grow my very large group of friends north of the border in Canada is always delightful for me.
Well, you've got us now, so.
I do.
So let's get into this a little bit because the movie and the documentaries and everything that has come out over the last number of years about Bathsheba, about this subject, about this story, most people I think know about this from the movie The Conjuring, and this documentary is not that. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Well, this was one of the few documentaries that I've done that included almost every member of my family. My mother declined simply because of her health and not being able to travel to do an interview. But everybody else, every living member of my family participated in this. And I think in spirit, even my baby sister, April, who passed away this month in 2017, very suddenly and tragically. And I do have to say, that had I not grown up in an environment where I was routinely exposed to the other side of existence, I don't even know how I would have been able to cope with her loss, because she was the youngest member of our family. She was just 2 weeks shy of her 52nd birthday. And she came to each and every one of us almost immediately. And
Wow.
it was so easy to recognize that, oh yes, this is her, that,
Yeah.
there's no other way that this would have happened. Only she knew about this. I mean, it was that kind of a thing. And in fact, she passed away in her sleep. And the first thing that she did was come to my sister Cindy as a full body apparition.
Wow, that's wonderful.
She had to, because she didn't know she was dead.
Mm.
Wow.
And Cindy had to help her cross. And I, that changed everything.
Mm.
It changed everything. It not only fundamentally changed our family by fracturing our hearts, but it also confirmed everything that we each individually know about supernatural activity and how incredibly real it is.
So before everything started, what, if any, were family spiritual practices or beliefs? Did your family have any kind of belief in the afterlife or higher power or anything like that?
That was a disservice that was done by the Conjuring to my family,
Mhm.
among several, because I guess in Hollywood, where they conjure up these stories, they needed to make it seem as though the devout Roman Catholic Warrens were juxtaposed to the godless heathen parents.
Gotcha.
And
Right.
and nothing could have been further from the truth. It was the one thing of all the things in the film that my mother could have taken great exception to. That was the thing that really disturbed her, because not only does it misrepresent our family, but it misrepresents experiencers in the field. Most people who have extreme hauntings are actually deeply connected to spirit, through a religious belief or whatever doctrine they espouse. Not so many godless heathens that have experiences like this.
Yeah, isn't that funny?
Yeah.
I know.
Well, I think, when you look back on parapsychology and the studies and the people that, like you say, have experienced this stuff, I think, when you've got people that don't believe that it can happen to them, I mean, they're not really setting themselves up or opening themselves up to experiences of any kind. And I mean, we see this reflected in Gansfeld experiments and remote viewing experiments and things like that, where people that believe that this type of thing is a possibility, that there is more out there, they will typically have more experiences and have better luck with remote viewing and things like that than people who just think that, nope, there's nothing and we're all meat suits walking around and all of that. So it makes sense.
It does. And when we moved into the house, my parents purchased it in December of 1970, and we moved in a few weeks later. And ghosts weren't on the radar for us. We were all born and raised Catholic. My mother converted to Catholicism to marry my father. She was a Southern Baptist originally. And back in those days, you really, one partner had to convert if there was a difference in religions, which is, insane, but it's how it was. And, we were all baptized. We all made our confirmation. I mean, our first communions. And I mean, we were a church going family, and went to St. Aidan's Parish in Cumberland, Rhode Island. Once we moved there, when I was about, I think maybe 5 or 6, when we moved from our original family home in Willimantic, Connecticut. Ghosts weren't on the radar for a number of reasons. I think that both of my parents are very pragmatic Virgos, and reality is what they can see and smell and taste and hear and touch. They're five sensory 3D pragmatists, and both of them were, over the course of the 10 years that we lived at that farm. I mean, my mother was practically an atheist. She just wanted to marry
Wow.
my father, and she would have done anything to do it. So, she went to Catholic school, preparatory marriage Catholic school. I don't know what it's called, but just so that this union could take place.
Mm-hmm.
And they had been together for 14 years and produced 5 children before we moved to that farmhouse. When the word ghost came up, it was in church, the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, or it was, who wants to be the ghost for Halloween? I've got one sheet that I'm willing to
Right.
carve holes into.
Yeah.
I mean, that was it. The only even remote contact that anybody in the family had with anything paranormal was Dark Shadows
Mm-hmm.
that I used to race
Right.
home from school to watch in the afternoon. And, the rest of my sisters were generally outside playing, had no interest in it at all. And I just thought that, Barnabas Collins was a pretty fascinating character, but I didn't,
Yeah.
and nor do I believe in vampires. I don't.
Right.
But I just thought it was fascinating, and it was a show that I kind of got hooked on. But I was literally the only one in my family that had any interest in even the broadest perspective on the genre.
Well, and being such a non-believer, this must have been such a challenge for them, not only just on the physical side of dealing with a haunting like this, but a paradigm shift at such a core level for people who have never experienced, but also, maybe didn't believe at all, like you were saying about your mom.
Well, it was my father was deeply faithful. He went to parochial school. He was an altar boy for most of his youth. He joined the Navy during the Korean War right out of high school. And then he met my mother. And she was the one that really shifted everything for him, because his intention had been to do a tour of service and then go directly into the seminary to become a priest.
So how did it all start?
It started within 5 minutes of moving into the farm.
Wow.
And yet we had visited the farm a number of times prior. As a whole family, at least 5 or 6 times that we spent the day with Mr. Kenyon, who we bought the farm from. And none of us, believe me, I went back with every member of my family. And as I was writing my books, a trilogy called House of Darkness, House of Light, which is the real story behind The Conjuring, I was able to include the vast majority of the incidents that occurred with every member of my family, because April was still alive when I was writing the books. And so I'm grateful that her stories got to be included completely in the trilogy. But I will tell you that none of us have any memory at all of seeing or feeling anything untoward at the farm prior to the day that we moved in. And we spent many, many hours there prior to my parents signing the papers. It was almost as if they were lurking and just waiting behind the curtain, just kind of checking us out, but we didn't have, the opportunity to check them out. And I think that it was because we were really supposed to have that experience, and making their presence known prematurely might have stopped that transaction dead in its tracks. So I
Right.
don't know. That's pure speculation on my part. But the day that we moved in, I walked into the house first with a box off the back of the moving van. It was freezing cold. It was January 11th, 1971. We were in the midst of a swirling snow and ice storm that day. But if you're a good, hearty Yankee and it's moving day, then you move.
It sounds like Alberta. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. You know, what's a foot of snow? Really? You're going to let that stop you?
Forget it.
Yeah, I know. So, you know, I can completely relate to all of you. However, when I walked in the house, Mr. Kenyon was, I went in the front door into the parlor because it was the closest door. And I knew that made me a little closer to maybe some warmth. And I rounded the corner from the parlor into the dining room, and Mr. Kenyon was standing at the table packing up some items from his china cabinet.
Right.
And I said, good morning. I put the box down on the table, started chatting with him, didn't notice anything else. And then I picked up the box and I started walking into the kitchen to bring the box marked kitchen to my mother in the kitchen. And there was a man standing between me and the doorway that I needed to go through to get to the kitchen. And so as I started walking past him, I said, good morning, sir. And he did not respond to me. He looked as flesh and blood as any living soul I've ever met. I did not identify him as anything other than maybe an oddly dressed neighbor who had come to say goodbye and felt like it was perfectly okay to ignore children. I went into the kitchen. I asked my mother who the man was with Mr. Kenyon. She said to me, there's nobody with Mr. Kenyon. His son's on the way. He's not here yet. I'm sure I thought, okay, it, you know, must be a neighbor or something. And I do remember thinking that he was oddly dressed and wondering, you know, like, does everybody out here dress like that? Because we were out in the boondocks,
right,
compared to where we came from, you know, and I was just a kid and I was used to, you know, a certain kind of, I don't know, I guess couture, suburban couture, you know, in the 70s was, you know, bell bottoms and peace signs and tie dye. And this guy looked like he had made his outfit before he came. And then my sister Christine came in and she saw him and he appeared quite alive to her. And she came in the kitchen and said, you know, Mom, who's the guy with Mr. Kenyon? Well, my mother's unpacking boxes. She's got my 5-year-old sister, April, by her side because she was too small to help unpack. And so she kept her as her little helper in the kitchen. And then Cindy comes in. I've already gone out the kitchen door and I'm heading back to the truck. Christine's right behind me. Cindy comes into the kitchen and she's like, Mom, who's that man with Mr. Kenyon? He's dressed funny. And my mother was just like, I don't know. His son's on the way. Go get me another box. You know, she didn't have time to go look and investigate anything, and nothing like that even occurred to her. And then Nancy came in before Cindy left the kitchen. Nancy came in behind her and she leaned over and she said, Sin, did you see that man with Mr. Kenyon? I did, but he just disappeared.
Wow.
And that all happened within the first 5 to 10 minutes that we were moving into the farm. Later in the day, Mr. Kenyon and my father were talking in the middle of the house, which was the dining room. And 4 of the 5 of us who had seen this man earlier were standing in there because the truck had been unloaded and we were all together in the house warming up. And my father could see that Mr. Kenyon was, you know, just so forlorn about having to leave his home. And my dad was telling him that it would be perfectly okay with as much space as we had in the house if he just wanted to stay and live with us. It was a very touching and a very tender moment.
I believe it.
And Mr. Kenyon declined because he said his son would not allow it.
Wow.
Which was heartbreaking. And suddenly that man is standing in the corner of the dining room again. And all four of us are looking at each other, of the children looking at each other like, I see him. Do you see him? Do you see him? I see him. Nobody said a word. And Mr. Kenyon and my father did not see that apparition. Only we, the children, did.
It's fascinating. And it's so interesting with these experiences how that type of thing will happen, where there's a couple of people that will observe something, or a group of people that will observe something, and then either observe it differently, or, you know, there'll be people that in the room that are just out of tune with it, or whatever seems to be going on. There was a huge escalation in events, as we know from the documentary and things like that, right up to the Warrens coming in and pushing the idea of a seance on your parents at the time.
Yeah.
What that to me really, it really struck me, because as a researcher myself, you know, I've always been one to really understand that the client really is the first and foremost important thing. The living is the thing that you're supposed to be focused on. And this always really struck me. Can you talk about the seance a little bit? Do you think that was a genuine possession?
I think it was incredibly irresponsibly handled.
Yeah.
That it should never have happened in the first place. That the Warrens had, I think, the best of intentions,
Yeah.
but they were way over their heads. The medium that they brought with them committed what I consider to be spiritual malpractice. You do not throw open wide the gates to the netherworld and conjure the spirits in a supremely haunted house where 5 children live, without having some expectation that something will come through that you might not be able to handle. And that is exactly what happened. She ended up unconscious on the table. My mother was picked up in the chair in which she sat and was thrown 20 feet into the middle of our parlor, where her head struck the floor. And every person that was in that house that night, including me and my sister Cindy, who were watching this happen, were quite certain that we had just seen our mother die.
I believe it. It just sounded so violent and so sudden.
It was.
It was just unbelievable. So when they approached with this idea, how did the seance start? Was this the slow build to the violence? Did this happen quickly? Was this a quick escalation? What happened there?
My father had come home from being out on the road for about a week. He had his own jewelry business. And so he traveled quite a bit. His trunk always full of fashion and fine jewelry, because Providence at the time was like the jewelry capital of the world. And he had been gone for probably about a full week and came home. He was very tired. It was August of 1974. And Mr. and Mrs. Warren had reached out to my mother earlier in the day. Now, keep in mind, cell phones had not been invented yet. And they called from Connecticut, where they lived, and asked if they could stop by that night. And my mother, reluctantly agreed to let them come. Of course, at that point, we knew who they were. They had been to the house several times. And when my father came home, he's like, nope, call him back. I'm watching the Red Sox play tonight, and we're having dinner together, and I don't want company. And nope, call him back and tell him not to come. Well, they had already left Connecticut. There was no way to catch them on the road. And so he was really agitated about it. And my mother, seeing how negative he was being, told us to start calling around to girlfriends and see. It was a Friday night, so she wanted us to disperse from the house in case, Dad were to get ugly. And only Nancy could find somebody to go spend the night with. So the other 4 of us were in the house when they arrived. And it wasn't just them, it was an entire entourage of people, cinematographers with huge cameras and, tons of equipment, and an audio specialist with a big reel-to-reel, and a priest and the medium, the Warrens. Well, my father's head blew off his shoulders.
No kidding.
And
Wow.
the more angry he got, the more my mother shut down, because as soon as they came in, they started talking about, we're here to conduct a seance. And my father's attitude about that was, oh, hell no, you're not. No, you are not doing anything like that in this house. And the priest and Ed Warren took my father off to a secluded spot and talked to him for quite some time. Lorraine Warren took her life into her own hands that day, because she looked my father dead in the eye and she said, if you love your wife, you'll let us do this.
Wow.
So it was like, it was like an ultimatum, like, if you don't let us do this, then you don't love your wife. And oh my God, Ed and the priest had to remove him from the room. I mean, he was so angry. And so, it just got worse and worse. And my mother just sat there on the sofa with her head hanging down, tears in her eyes. She didn't want to do this. She didn't know what to do. And she started to become almost catatonic. When they came back out of the room, the children, myself included, were dismissed, told to go upstairs, close doors, don't come downstairs for any reason. Well, you know how long that lasted.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah, Christine was the only one that actually followed directions, and she stayed in her bedroom, laying in her bed, crying, right directly over all hell breaking loose below her, because her room was directly above the dining room where this all took place. And it all happened after they all came together. My father refused to participate. He did not want to participate. And Ed told him, that he absolutely had to, that his energy was necessary for my mother's protection, and my father still, at this point, he's like, this isn't real. This can't be happening. I mean, he had accepted it and yet not. And he did not think that this ritual was going to be in any way, yielding a positive outcome. And he was absolutely right about that.
Yeah, with that type of energy, I mean, that type of, just intention just from the living people. I mean, you can't be, vibrating at that frequency and have stuff end well like that, that's
Right.
That's just, it just doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah. Well, the medium started speaking in, I believe, Latin. And she had little pouches of stuff, kind of crystals and what looked like fairy dust and, stuff. They lit candles. And within a few moments, it was as if a hurricane force wind came through that room and blew out the candles. There was no light other than residual light from other rooms. And my mother slumped down in her chair and then threw back her head and howled like a creature from another realm. This was not spirit. Yeah. Whatever it was that had been invited in by the medium went to the weakest link, which was my mother. And I will not call it a possession. But my mother was attacked.
Right.
And whatever it was, briefly attacking her in this way, spoke through her in a language that is either so ancient that there's no record of it, or that does not exist on this planet. And it started lifting the table, and then the table, which was a couple of 100 pounds anyway, solid rock maple, hit the table. The table hit the floor so hard it left impressions where the feet hit the wood.
Wow.
And then my mother started, she was curling up in a ball in the chair, like to the extent you would expect to hear bones breaking. This is not something that they would even consider using in The Conjuring, because according to James Wan, it would have literally run people out of the theater. And so they toned it down so significantly that you get what you get in The Conjuring. But, you know, there was no blood. My mother was elevated in the chair in which she sat about a foot off the floor. And then in a split second, and I do mean, this is not hyperbole, measure how long a second is and then shave about 9/10 of it off. And in that amount of time, she and the chair that she was sitting in were heaved straight across the room. And that's when she went down on the floor in the parlor and struck her head.
I can't imagine the trauma that you guys experienced because of that. And it brings up some questions as well about Warner Brothers and things like that. Mike, did you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, you mentioned that James Wan was a little nervous about telling the truth. Why do you think it was that he and Warner Brothers were really afraid of really getting into what actually happened, what your family really experienced? Was it just for storytelling purposes, or was there something that they were afraid of?
That's it. Bingo, right on the nose. You know, we're all fear-based carbon units to one extent or another. And I'm using this phrase verbatim from James. I was scared shitless when I read your books.
Wow.
He's like, he would not even go look at the farm. They had actually contracted for the possibility of doing some filming at the actual farmhouse with the then owner. And after he read my books, he not only canceled that deal, but he refused to even go to Rhode Island, as though like the whole state was contaminated because of, you know, I don't know. But they ended up picking a house in Wilmington, North Carolina to film the movie because he would not go anywhere near that property, and has not been there to this day. Even though he's been, I'm sure, offered the opportunity many times, he will not. And he was terrified. And so, you know, I get that. I totally do. You know, also keep in mind that The Conjuring was based on, and I mean loosely based on the story as told by the Warrens.
Right.
And, you know, the Warrens, I'm sure in their case files made sure that they were represented well in their telling of the story. You know, to the victor goes the spoils, and they're the ones that write the history. Until I came along and told the real truth.
So you've written a lot more about this, and you have signed a movie deal regarding your books, correct?
Yes, it's actually I didn't sign anything yet because I've reconsidered what to do with this. 3 feature films will not tell that story.
Right.
So what my screenwriter and I have done is we've torn our screenplays apart and we've turned them into 30 episodes for a 3-season docudrama.
Oh, wow.
That's a great idea.
Thoroughly explore all the ramifications of this story and dig very deeply into the effect that this kind of activity has on humanity, focusing on the 7 members of my family, but other characters as well that came and went from that farm that were touched by spirit and and it changed their lives completely. Several, in fact. So, you know, it's just too big a story for feature films. And, you know, I don't fault anybody who made The Conjuring. They put their whole heart and soul into that movie. Everybody that was involved, I know them all. The young ladies who played us couldn't have been sweeter, more charming individuals. I got letters from everybody associated with that film when my sister April passed away.
Oh, wow.
I mean, and it was years. It was 4 years after the film had already come and gone, and yet they were all so touched by her loss that they all reached out to us in some way or another.
Do you think there were things that they got right in the movie?
Yes. Yeah, like 4 or 5 little tiny things that they got right.
Yeah.
I feel certain of it. No, really, Morgan.
At least a couple, right?
Well, it's interesting because there are things about the film that I refer to as cosmic kisses of the film.
Oh, that's lovely. I like that.
The way that the universe told me that it was okay.
Yeah.
That it was the way that it was told in such a way that, those that were interested more than having, a knee-jerk reaction and an adrenaline shot in a theater, who really wanted to know the story would find it. And they have, by, hundreds of thousands of people have read my trilogy of books. And it makes The Conjuring look like grainy black and white versus Technicolor Disney on steroids, in the real story. But I find that the people who gravitate to it are prepared for it. They're emotionally prepared. They're spiritually prepared. They gravitate to the truth in all things. And so it has changed innumerable lives. You cannot read the trilogy without being changed on the other side of it.
You've had some amazing experiences just, overall. And I think we're all three of us are on the same page about how the universe really does come together to create so many of these amazing experiences, and there are no coincidences.
No, there aren't.
There really aren't. And and do you think that there were positives that you took away from this that you wouldn't have gotten if you hadn't have had these experiences?
Oh God, yes. Oh, absolutely. And in fact, I'm so grateful to have grown up in an environment where I got to learn at a very young age that we don't live in a 3D 5 sensory world.
Yeah.
We live in a multi-dimensional universe.
Right.
And I got to discover that at the tender age of 12, and I'm 63 now. So for more than half a century, I've lived a paranormal life.
Yeah, I so identify with that, because for me, my first experiences were at 9, and Mike had his experiences quite early as well. And I think we've all been touched by that, and it really does. It changes how you look at the world when you're introduced to this stuff at an early age. And I know for myself, it's really taken away I think a fear of death and a fear of just things falling apart and whatnot. I've found that it's really changed my perspectives in that way. And I know, Mike, you felt similar for, in terms of this stuff.
This way of looking at the world, you can't possibly feel the same way after having an experience like you've had. And I'm sure it has deepened and broadened your sense of spirituality as well. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I will tell you that I think that my mother was secretly an atheist, or it's certainly at least agnostic when we moved into that farm. And when we moved out, she was a deeply faithful woman. The most important thing that she learned from the farm, and the most important thing that I learned from the farm, is to have no fear of death, because we know there is something beyond our mortal existence. This is not a matter of faith or a belief or conjecture on our part. We know, and there's a quantum leap of difference between believing something and knowing something. So as my mother's 82 now and in failing health, and yet, I visit with her frequently, and never once has she expressed, she's like, when it's my time, it's my time, let's party till I go. She's just, she's so, She's just, bless her heart, she's so sweet. But yes, it fundamentally changed my trajectory in life. When we moved to that farm, I was quite certain that I was going to grow up to be a veterinarian.
Yeah.
And now I'm an ordained minister with a degree in philosophy, which I felt compelled to explore when I went off to college, because I needed some answers. I needed to understand more deeply what the religious and spiritual implications were of what we were experiencing at the farm.
Right.
And that ultimately changed my entire trajectory in life.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you say that, because throughout all of my research over the years, and my great grandfather, he changed his trajectory in the same way. He used to be a physician, and then he ended up becoming very steeped in parapsychology and things like that. And I found that no matter whose story you look at, it really is a calling for so many people. It becomes so much more than just an interest. It's so much deeper than that. Have you felt that as well? That it's just been a pull or a calling? It's something that you've just got to do.
Yes. And I ignored it for 30 years. I did.
Yeah.
I was threatened with expulsion from high school, and I was a goody two shoes, straight A college preparatory student who answered a question from a classmate who went home and started telling his parents about me and the haunted house. And they promptly called the school.
Oh boy.
And threatened the principal, who promptly called me into the principal's office and threatened me with expulsion if I ever said another word about anything having to do with ghosts. And so I shut my mouth, and I kept it that way for many, many years, at least 3 decades. This was not something that I spoke about with anybody beyond a very close circle of friends and, of course, my immediate family.
Yes, societally, we see a lot of people shaming people who have these kind of beliefs. So
yeah,
it's interesting we don't hear about it more, because probably people think, well, if I say something, people are going to say I'm nuts.
Yeah. I got to the age that I didn't care anymore.
Right.
I thought that the message was more important than the madness that might surface around it. And I'm not talking about madness in terms of the paranormal community. I'm talking about the madness that surfaces outside of it by those who are scared to death that we're telling the truth.
Yeah. I think you hit the nail on the head with that, because I've found for the longest time, whether I'm doing a lecture or anything like that, or working in a classroom or whatever I happen to be doing, that usually the skeptics are often coming from that place of fear, and it's usually a place of lack of education.
Yeah, or lack of experience.
Absolutely.
No, and just because, these are the kind of people that say, well, that's never happened to me, so therefore it can't happen at all.
Yeah. I think it comes back
insane.
to that. It totally is. And it's so egocentric, at the end of the day, it's so egocentric. And I think it comes back full circle to what we were talking about at the beginning, which is this stuff changes people's paradigms. It makes them challenge the paradigms that they've held and that they've had. And if you're one of those people that are skeptical or, really clinging to the more materialist view of the world, this can really rattle your bones to the core of their being if you're so clinging to that outlook. Let's talk a little bit about your show, A World Awakening, because I think you've got such a great message. And
Thanks.
it's such a great demonstration of how you can turn something that someone could easily become bitter and frightened over and turn it into something that is a positive platform for people. Can you tell everybody a little bit about that show?
Well, I relaunched it as a YouTube show, and then KGRA picked me up internationally. It went into syndication about maybe 7 or 8 months ago, and I have viewers on 6 continents, which is, I think, a necessity if we're going to get the message out about how to cope with this period in the spiritual growth and evolution of humanity. There are, I don't live in, with butterflies and unicorns. And even though I wear rose-colored glasses because I think it really kind of is the only way to look at this world,
Absolutely.
I don't let it discolor my perceptions of reality. And we're living at a very difficult time in the course of human history. Everything is changing now. I believe that this is the paradigm shift, that this is when we, humanity, go through a global shift in consciousness and come to a higher frequency of being, and that all the lower life forms, in terms of consciousness, Putin, for instance, will be dispelled from this planet, and that we will go forward, hopefully, into a future of peace. So all hell is breaking loose right now. And I think that this is the main focus of what I do on A World Awakening. I've been dealing with the global pandemic, where, how important is the notion of an afterlife during a time when we're losing our nearest and dearest to an invisible virus worldwide. I think that it makes the whole genre more pertinent and poignant, and gives people hope and at least a notion that they can still communicate with their loved ones, even though they are no longer in a vessel. And then of course we dealt with, now this is just since I've relaunched the show. It used to be a blog talk radio show years and years ago. And then I relaunched it as video, YouTube, Facebook, and every place else on the planet. And then of course we dealt with the deliberate murder of George Floyd and the aftermath of that, and how it fundamentally changed the world and perceptions around the world. And so, in some ways, yes, I do march with my feet. I also march with my mouth as a spiritual warrior for peace. And that is not a counterintuitive concept. And in fact, I have come to understand that in 3D reality, one necessitates the other. You must vanquish what is evil on the planet. Evil, pure, unadulterated evil, exists on Earth. And, some people say, oh, good, evil, they're just concepts. And I say, go turn on the news. Yeah. Go take a look at what's happening in the world right now. Go take a look at what's happening in Afghanistan right now. That's off the circuits. We deal with things like that. It's hard for me because, I wouldn't even want to be here anymore if I didn't have a truly rudimentary belief that good conquers evil and love conquers fear, and that all will be well in the end. And if it's not well yet, then it's not the end.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, well, that you can thank John Lennon for that.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I just borrowed it, and he said I could. I talked to him just before when we did the show.
I've sort of been thinking about this, and I heard a quote years ago. I think that this is just the storm before the calm.
Yes.
Like a lot of things have to happen. An old friend of mine used to tell me, one of my spiritual gurus used to say, Mike, you have to get through the bramble bushes before you get to the picnic. So I think we're, as a world right now, we're in the bramble bushes on our way to the picnic.
You know what? In terms of alliteration, change it up a little bit. You got to walk through the pickies to get to the picnic.
There you go.
That's
Yeah. Right.
Well, and I think I think it's also, to use another analogy, when you've got dirt in the bottom of a glass of water and you want to fill that glass up, you pour that water in and all the dirt rises to the surface. And I think this world, and I think love right now, is very similar to that, where it's like
Yeah.
if you've got a lot of dirt that's settled and you pour love onto that, what happens is, that dirt's going to rise to the surface, and it rises to the surface to get cleaned up. I
It
think
does.
it really does. And it doesn't mean, like you were saying, that it's the end of the road or that it's the last chapter or anything like that. But it's there so that we can clean it up and move on. And so I love that about what you're saying. It's really, really great.
Well, I use the show to bring on a real eclectic mix of guests, most of whom are friends of mine that I've gotten to know over the last dozen years or so, that bring something to the discourse,
Yeah.
that bring a new perspective, a fresh idea, that have an ability to conceptualize and articulate perspectives that maybe people have not thought about before. Because my whole approach to a world awakening is that thoughts are things, and that if we
Absolutely.
project out into the ether, into the frequency, like the pebble in the pond, and the concentric circles go all the way to the shore, because it's a creation of energy. I talk about love being an action word, a verb instead of a noun, that it's the putting into. Our progress will come when we make love a verb and we show our ability to interact and to support and feel compassion for our fellow human beings and all life forms on this living planet. And when we get there, so it's kind of like it's 2 hours every Friday night Eastern time of raising awareness, consciousness raising, bringing people to a higher headspace, and making them think instead of just reactively feel everything that's coming at us right now. So I think in that respect, it fulfills a very valuable need.
I agree. And you just said something that Mike and I touch on constantly on this show, which is thoughts become things. And when we're focused and we have that intention and we make that decision, it's incredible what the universe will do to back up and promote the reality that you've projected out there. Like it will go to endless lengths. So I love that about love that about this. We are wrapping up to the end of our time. And this has been such an incredible pleasure, Andrea. And thank you so much for taking the time to do this. It's just wonderful to talk to you. And like you were saying, to make a new friend, we'd love to have you back at some
anytime.
point. This has just been great. And I'll take a couple of seconds here to let the audience know where they can watch this show. Because it's going to be amazing. And it's on tonight. It's on March 28th, tonight on the TNE network in Canada, Bathsheba Search for Evil. And it's at 8 p.m. Eastern. And we are just excited to see it. Mike and I got the privilege of getting a chance to watch it before this, and it was absolutely fabulous. I highly recommend everybody take the time, DVR it, do whatever you got to do, but definitely watch it, because it's really incredible, and we're really looking forward to whatever you decide to do with the story and the mini series, the docu-series, all of that. So thank you, Andrea, so much.
Oh, it's my pleasure entirely. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Morgan. This has been a delight for me. And you both know we just scratched the surface.
Yeah, for sure.
So you let me know whenever you want. I'll be filming all next week up in, I can't even say. I'm sorry. No, I can. No, I can't. Never mind.
Non-disclosure. Non-disclosure. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, oh damn, I signed that piece of paper.
Yep.
We're working on a number of projects. I told one of my producers we should call our company Global Pandemic Productions because we got so much done in the last 2.5 years from my man cave and computer and him over in California. And it's like, oh my God, so much. But yeah, this has been delightful for me. And I always appreciate it when I'm given the opportunity to speak my truth. And I invite everybody not only to watch Bathsheba, Search for Evil, the best documentary made on this subject, hands down, no competition.
Yeah.
Really, I mean that. And a wonderful crew of people. But I also want to invite everybody to join us on A World Awakening on Friday nights, 9 to 11 Eastern time. And also, if you're up for it and you think you've got the wherewithal, dare to order House of Darkness, House of Light, volumes 1, 2, and 3 will alter your perspective on the entire universe. So thank you both very much for having me on.
Thank you so much, Andrea. You're a wonderful human being.
Thank you.
Again, Bathsheba, Search for Evil airs on the day this podcast drops, Monday, March 28th at 8 p.m. Eastern and Pacific on T&E, the Travel and Escape channel in Canada. Please check the T&E website for dates and times of subsequent airings. Here's Morgan for this episode's segment of Spiritual Healthcare.
In this episode's edition of Spiritual Healthcare, the segment of the show where you get to be the creator and designer of your paranormal and spiritual experience, we're going to tell you about a process called the Universal Manager. This is a great process to use when you're feeling overwhelmed with a lot on your plate. We tend to forget, when we have a lot going on, that we are not alone. We might feel that way when we look around us. Maybe your coworkers aren't helping out, you're running your own business and there's still a lot to do, bills might be piling up. Whatever it is for you, there is a non-physical help we need to remember and can call on. Take a piece of paper and draw a line down the middle. On one half, title the column The Universe, Source, God, non-physical energy, whatever feels good for you. On the second column, title it You. You are about to turn a whole bunch of worries over to your Universal Manager. It's waiting to unleash its help and is awaiting some instruction. Write down the things you don't want to deal with, the things that feel too big, too out of control, too time-consuming. Now, under the category of you, write down what you feel you can feel good about getting done. Don't overwhelm your side of the list. Remember, you can't overtax non-physical energy. Once you're done, know that it is taken care of. Your list has been read and understood, and the Universal Manager is on it. Remember, don't micromanage the universe. It's a better planner, organizer, and is more efficient than you. Let it go. Feel the relief. Focus on your list and watch what happens. You need nothing to be happy, but you need something to be sad. And remember, at the end of seeking, all is consciousness. Stay in peace, everyone.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Supernatural Circumstances, a co-production of Entity Seeker Paranormal Research and Teachings and Good Egg Studios. This podcast is part of the Curious Cast podcast network. Theme music by Corey Johnson of Catalyst Records in Edmonton, Alberta. You can find out more about Morgan Knudsen at entityseeker.ca and more about me and listen to my other show at darkpoutine.com. Feel free to email the show at supernaturalcircumstances@gmail.com. Good night for now.